So, I just read what I think is the blackest comic book I've ever read in my life. I'm gonna say something y'all probably aren't as used to hearing me say on this channel, and I have to say this because I know that if I say it, it's gonna make y'all realize I'm dead ass. This comic is the most mad niggerish comic I have ever read in my life, and I want more of it.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It is your boy Ernie, the Blerd Without Fear. Welcome back to the channel. All right, so today's video, I want to talk about a comic from AWA Upshot called They Choose Violence. This is a series that, to my understanding, is only going to run for 5 issues, but so far we've already gotten issues 1 and 2, and both issues have just been living rent-free. Like rent-free in my head. I would say probably one of the best books, at the very least, on shelves in your LCS, maybe if your LCS carries these types of books. It's clearly one of the best books out there, and I wanted to talk about it. I gotta talk about it because I know this is gonna be one of those things that, well, yes, I know superheroes and capes all day, every day. Yeah, that's fine, but some of my favorite books don't have shit to do with capes, and I know the algorithm's not gonna be kind to it, but I wanna talk to you guys about this book because I'm hoping that me talking to you about this book is gonna get you to go to your LCS and maybe say, hey, can you put this on my pull list because this book is that important. So what is They Choose Violence all about? I'm gonna go ahead and say trigger warning in this video because if you are either A, someone who is the least bit sensitive to the topic of black men, women, and or children being gunned down by the police, or by just some random white person who is basically trying to play Punisher, I'm gonna go tell you right now, that's what this book is about. B, if you are a white person, or just a non-black person, who feels some type of way when someone says, fuck the police, or defund the police, or blue lives don't matter, or if you're one of those types of people who, like, whenever a black person is killed by the police, especially in a capacity where the black person in question is unarmed, in most cases, I would dare say innocent, and 99.9999999% of the time, the police officer in question probably got away scot-free. If you're one of those types of people, well, for one, I don't care about your feelings, but see yourself out if you're not willing to open your mind up and learn something. This is a comic series that follows 3 black women. Lanika, who is a woman who started out being more interested in computer sciences, but ultimately ended up changing her career path to being a lawyer in the wake of witnessing so many black people being murdered, publicly executed by the police. Next up would be Deidre, who is kind of more of the upper crust member of the group, but just because she is that upper crust member of the group doesn't mean she's not as ratchet as the rest of the characters. When you see her compared to the other 2 characters, she is the most light-skinned of the group, and she also works in a rich, more affluent part of town. It's even kind of insinuated she lives in a more rich and affluent part of town. She works as the owner of a spa that basically caters to rich old white people. But even with all that, she is no less black than the other 2 characters. And speaking of the other 2, we have our final character, that being Karen, who is the more darker complected woman among the group, who is also a cop. Now, just because she's a cop doesn't mean that she's on that Blue Lives Matter bullshit. As a matter of fact, when all of the events that come into play that lead to these 3 characters, as the title would imply, choosing violence, she is the one who makes the suggestion that they become vigilantes. And while yes, it's a lot of black bodies being publicly executed in the streets that lead to this, one particular one hits just a little bit more close to home than others, because there is an instance where a young black teen who they all are familiar with on some level is killed by the police. And once again, he was a good kid who was well on his way to college. It's highly implied that he very likely would have, if not gunned down by the police, would have found his way into an Ivy League school of his choosing, very likely with a full ride. That's just how smart he was. He was also the type of kid who started a after-school non-profit organization to help feed the unhoused and food insecure in his neighborhood. He was a good kid who did nothing wrong, and yet he was publicly executed by Johnny Law. And as you would imagine, Johnny Law got away. So what they end up doing, and I thought this actually really kind of made this book feel more realistic than what it was. And not to say the book isn't realistic, there's a lot of realism in this. There's obviously a point where we see that Lanika has gone to multiple different protests. It kind of showcases just how deep in the trenches she is on this, where you can literally see the passage of time in the different places that she has been to protest, saying the same thing over and over again, and very much in the signage, not so much in the dialogue, because there's no dialogue in these parts, but very much in the signage that she is using. You can tell which person in real life she's talking about who was publicly executed by the police. But when I talk about realism, what I'm actually talking about is, it's not one of those deals where they just start going out and executing white people willy-nilly. No, they don't do that. They actually train to do this. They actually spend, they tell you, the better part of 11 months they spend training, breaking themselves down to their most basest parts, training to become the vigilantes that they are planning to become. Now, they're not turning into people wearing capes or anything like that, so go ahead and get that out of your mind. They are very much a more low-tech, and I would even dare say more vicious. Like, honestly, I feel like even the Punisher would look at some of the stuff that they do in these first two issues and be like, God damn. It's that level of chicanery. But one of the things that you have to take stock of is that, yes, these women, they learn how to wield all types of firearms, small arms to large arms. They also spend a lot of time exercising. They end up cutting off all their hair. They spend so much time at the gun range. They spend so much time exercising, jogging, running miles, doing CrossFit, doing all kinds of like hand-to-hand combat training and knife training. And they even go as far as at one point showing you that they are repeatedly punching walls almost bare knuckle. Like, they have like their hands wrapped, but I mean, for the most part, they are bare knuckle battering their fists to train their bodies to be as hard and as strong as they need to be before they ultimately start going out after, once again, 11 months of training, which I know some people are like, oh, that's not enough time. But if you got to think about this, they're literally doing this every day for 11 months. That's a long time. Like, we're literally talking about almost an entire year. 330 some odd days that they have been training. They say it takes 10,000 hours to master anything. Let's say on the low end, they spend 332 days training, 24 hours. It kind of judges on like a 24-hour basis. Especially since they're doing it every day. I mean, you may as well go ahead and just give them credit for the whole thing. That is 7,968 hours. It's even fair to say that they're not masters at what they do. As a matter of fact, it's even talked about in the second issue that, well, yes, they're very careful. They choose their targets wisely. They make sure not to leave any evidence for them to be caught. They do mention that if the law actually was interested in finding them, they probably would have been found. But yes, they actually go after first a police officer who got away with the young teen's murder, but also they start going after not just cops, they start going after judges, lawyers, lobbyists. They start hitting people who actually have power and can make change and use that power for white supremacy. Love to see it. Love to see it. It's good shit. But what really sells this book is that, well, yes, they've gone out doing this a lot. Like, it's actually stated that they came up with a list of 30 some odd names and they just started running down all of them, for the most part. But something happens that causes them to take pause, and it's what makes you realize when this story takes place. It doesn't take place in the present day. It takes place in 2016. And that's what happens. All the stuff they're doing, they realize they've started scaring the shit out of white people. To the point, Donald Trump gets elected for the first time. With that being said, even though he does come up at the very butt end of the first issue, he doesn't really play much of a major factor in the story itself. It's really just a thing to let you know where everything is in this. But the thing that I really kind of thought was, I would say, hilarious. I would actually use the word hilarious for this, is that, well, yes, Donald Trump being elected should probably put the fear in them that things are going to change. It's not really just Donald Trump. It's everything that came with him. The fact that MAGA became, the movement of white supremacy that it became, and still is, mind you. Also, the fact that with Donald Trump brought a sweeping change to the type of government that was in place. Because you gotta remember, they started out this journey under the Obama administration. I mean, to be fair, I don't think Obama being in office really had as much to do with it, so much as it's just that it wasn't so much that there was a black man in office that made it easy, it just was more easy that they could get away with things because a white supremacist wasn't in office. I think that actually has more to do with anything else. But with Trump being in office, that brought those sweeping changes to how police dealt with things, the way the government and the DOJ and everyone else dealt with things. And ultimately, they do realize they have heat on them, so they end up quitting. But what I like about this, and when you get into that second issue, they also have to recognize that, well, yes, they have quit doing the thing. It's actually messed up their friendship. The idea that they had grown closer, that like doing what they were doing, it caused them to become better friends than they already were. And let's be clear, they were already super tight, but losing that pact that brought them closer together, it broke them to the point they stopped being friends. And the few times they do interact with each other, it seems more like work than it actually seems like fun. And that's kind of what I like about the second issue, is because, while yes, Lanika is the one who's kind of largely carrying the first issue, it's Karen who's carrying the second one. And Karen is a very interesting character in so much that, it's something I didn't mention earlier because it wasn't really important, but she's a lesbian. I think between the group, it's not to say the others aren't. I mean, it's pretty obvious that Deidre likes men. And Lanika, there's a point where she brings up going to strip clubs to like throw money at white women when they go do the things that they do. But as far as like being openly gay, like Karen is the only one. And while Karen is the most openly gay, she still also messes around with dudes, albeit only to be the giver, not the receiver. But we learn a lot about her as a character over the course of the second issue. And it kind of tells you a lot as far as where the series is gonna go with some of the latter parts of it, because once again, they stopped killing people. They went from taking down white supremacists and white supremacist adjacent people to the tune of, like I said, some odd almost 30 people, give or take, and ultimately doing it in such a way that didn't really give any patterns that anyone outside of the diaspora would pick up on. They mostly did their deed on the birthdays of black icons, and even in some cases, people who were instrumental to civil rights on some level or another, and even in some cases, people who were either one or the other, who were killed at the hands of white supremacy. So there's that. But the thing that actually brings it all back around full circle is when it's Karen's birthday. And what happens is they actually find a guy who is very much a stand-in for George Zimmerman, the very man who became famous for the murder of Trayvon Martin. They don't say his name's George Zimmerman, but there's a lot of things that are pointed out that basically let you know this is what they do. This is where we kind of get a little bit more of a look into actually how they take these people out, because the way the first issue would frame things, you would be able to believe that the killings are just that. They just find the people in their lives and move on with their day. But we actually find out it's a lot deeper than that. They actually go, I would dare say, well above and beyond the call of duty to ritualize what they do, but also at the same time, actively make it as painful as humanly possible. They go online and look up all sorts of memorabilia, like weapons and things that are said to have been used in the killings of black people. Finding guns and knives and things of that nature, finding whips and chains and things of that nature, and using those things to inflict the very same types of pain and harm and suffering on their victims. There's a point where we find out that each of them technically has a moniker that they go by. We find out that Lanika goes by the name Whiplash because she often likes to use a whip, the same type of whip that was used on slaves back in the day to whip the people who they go after. We also find out that Deidre goes by the name Hang Girl because she uses a noose to choke the people who they target to the point that they almost die, but then don't. Then we also find out Karen goes by the name The Impaler. Now, the reason why is because this kind of alludes to a thing we saw in the previous issue. Sometimes, even though she does seem to be the more openly gay of the group, she does not hesitate to peg a guy. And she tends to use the most gruesome of implements. Anyway, just know there is, for all my old school adult film heads, the name Lex the Impaler and Mr. Marcus comes up at least once. And you can let your imagination help you figure out what she does with those. But yes, ultimately they do all of this before they actually end the person's life. Now, the thing that's gonna make everything even more interesting is that how they get these people. How do they target these people? How are these three black women able to lure these people in? And it's because they actually use a trick that white supremacists often use on black people. They pretend. They do a setup. We've seen this happen not just in other TV shows and movies, whatnot. We've seen this happen in real life where people will pretend to be part of whatever community they're trying to attract, and then bring that person and lure them into a particular situation and then end their lives. And that's what Lanika, Deidre, and Karen do. They pretend to be a white woman. In the case of the men, they pretend to be like a white woman. You basically hit on that person online, lure them into a false sense of security, and then boom, they fall into the trap. Bob's your uncle. And what makes all this even more interesting though is that once they get back into the swing of things after that re-up on Karen's birthday, they go back to the races, doing everything the same as they used to. They're friends again now. But the thing that's gonna actually make this series even more interesting, and I like that each issue so far, granted we've only gotten 2 so far, but I love the fact that each issue, up to this point, always ends with a type of cliffhanger that basically lets you know things are only going to get crazier. And that's because when we get to the end of issue 2, we find out that while, yes, the gang has gotten back together, they basically inspire a copycat, but not the kind of copycat you might be expecting. They don't inspire more black people. They inspire what is presumably a white person or group of white people. The very last scene is kind of a bookend for this issue, where we see that there's a white man sitting in a chair with his head decapitated from his body laying in his lap. And by the time you get to the end of this issue, you're gonna see the exact same thing. The only difference is, it's not a white man. It's a black man. Basically letting you know that, people who probably very likely, MAGA people, most likely, because they come up multiple times, in various and sundry ways. Someone, of that ilk has decided to do exactly what, Lanika, Deidre, and Karen are doing. Only, like I said, they're targeting people like them. And I can't wait to see how all this is going to play up. And I will say, if you haven't checked out this series, you really should. And I said this earlier because I wanted to make it very clear that this is how you save a book. If you want books like this, you enjoy books like this, make sure you go to your LCS. Make sure you ask the person behind the counter to put these comics in your pull list or your pull box, because pre-orders, unlike most other parts of the industry, you know, I actually think pre-orders, bullshit. I think they're bullshit in every industry. There's only one industry that actually thrives on pre-orders and it's actually helpful to that industry to do so, and that's with comic books. Those numbers help dictate whether or not you get more of a thing. This could be one of those things where, like, I mean, I think in this particular case, yeah, you're gonna get all 5 issues of They Choose Violence, but the question is, if there were any more issues to be gained from it or any more stories from the creative team in question, what would make that easier is if these books are flying off the shelves because people are pre-ordering the shit out of them. That's why I would say go to your LCS and say, hey, I choose They Choose Violence.